click the links, and you'll have clicked the links. So I read these two great a book and a great article. This article and then Animal Farm, and I quickly came to the very obvious conclusion that modern comics is the Animal Farm story, which parallels the left in general. They seize power and they slowly work towards becoming what they claim to be fighting against. This by Chuck Dixon article, or it's from his YouTube channel, he's on YouTube, about the history of comics. It got me thinking about Animal Farm, which I just picked up at the lending library. I reread it. It's like 3 hours to read it, and it's an awesome book, shorter and to the point in 1984, which is great, but 1984 is dark. And Aldous Huxley's Brave New World covers kind of similar topics, but in a much lighter, funnier way. Anyway, so Animal Farm was written 70 years ago, and it accurately describes China, Cuba, Russia, North Korea, Haiti, Cambodia, and the mass hysteria of Antifa and BLM, and those kind of groups throughout history, and the puppet masters, the Soros, the Schwabs, Rothschilds, Larry Finks, who are pulling the strings at using wealth from like Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street to achieve their desires. That book is an absolute must read, like right now, if you want to. The smallest investment of time for you to understand what's going on right now. Like, you'll read it and be like, oh yeah, I read this as a kid, but to reread it and really have it click in your head is a trip. Like, you think the guy is prescient, the way you read the book and then look around and you're like, oh, more people should read this book. A book that predicts the future because it already has been proven right. Read the book, then watch the critical theory tactics in schools. Look at if you've watched some of those Antifa meetings or how they interact with each other, it's like herd-based fear behavior. You'll hear the same brainwashing. The evolution of comics, as seen in Superman, for our example, is a shift from class-based populism, which should be logical to a child, to race-based Marxism, or really globalism. Globalism is kind of a collection of all these things, but even worse. The old comics weren't exactly left versus right, but more based on class or populism. The superhero fighting the fat cat banker, landlord, or businessman, the little guy against the structures of wealth and power. The ethnicity obviously wasn't relevant, because you're going to find wealth and power across the spectrum, which again should be obvious to a child. But herd thinking, herd behavior of the left is terrifying, because if they start to think independently, they get shouted down by people in their group. But comics isn't about comics anymore, and I don't know if it ever was. And comics slowly got subverted, as well as the left in general, by these piggy puppet masters. The struggle for a fair society is class-based. Wealth is power. But the puppet masters are not stupid. They're not about to allow a narrative to get out beyond their control. So they exert control over these publishers, the media, the teachers' unions, the colleges. Anywhere where you have a nexus point, you can exert pressure on a fulcrum, a pivot point that's disproportionate to the outcome. They act in concert, which, again, it should be obvious to anyone. They act in concert to shift. It's like, yeah, gee, if this was true, the media would bring it to our attention. My point being that they already subverted the media or the schools. I don't know when the schools shifted away from teaching you how to think to what to think, but that's very much the case nowadays, especially at the lower level. There's like the schools in general, there's no saving the schools. The structure is so completely infested. There's nothing you can do. You have to sit at every school board meeting, and people think they want to live in a high trust society, and they thought that things would kind of run themselves. No, I mean, the schools are so bad now. You got to create new schools, new small micro schools, according to your own beliefs. So they act in concert to shift the focus away from wealth being power to the nation of your origin, your skin tone. The wealthy, these string pullers, they're not about to allow the rabble to examine them too closely, to look behind the curtain from Oz. They'll retain their power by buying people's loyalty in pivot points, and then put their own agents and useful idiots in power. The ultra wealthy don't fund left wing groups so that they will take their wealth away. If you're an Antifa kid or some college kid and you believe that, I mean, slap yourself. You've got more in common with the right wing guys who are, off doing their things than you do with these people, these hidden sources of financial input that are actually funding these left wing groups. So now the modern comics, the hero of the marginalized, oppressed, and disenfranchised, they fight, and they're always going to be non-Euro. For the example of Ms. Marvel, if I remember right, fights some blonde kids who are trolling online at that hacker known as 4chan or some parallel to Gab or Telegram or some website that has freer speech, and free speech terrifies them, so they use the example of comics to show, how dangerous free speech is. We need to control your speech because we know what's best for you. You look at these people who say this, and you think, you guys couldn't raise a house plant. I wouldn't trust you. I wouldn't trust you with a ficus. You'd probably be humping it. So you have the superhero who's brown, going after some blonde kid who's trolling online, and no due process for him, no Fourth or Fifth Amendment for that kid, or Second Amendment groups with Mark Waid and Kwanzaa's Ignited. I'm sure you've seen that scene in other comics beyond just Ignited, or who are in Arizona, and it's all like blonde-haired or red-haired people in Arizona in current year, which is the real joke. Or blonde people in small towns who form groups. That's from Captain America. I don't remember the guy who wrote that. The guy who wrote it is insane. I've got some of his. I've looked through his Twitter. He's just dude is he's not playing with the full deck, and he's kind of the hero of the left wing. So the superhero calls these groups hate groups. So then, once you call somebody a hate group or a fashionable one or something, violence against these blonde people becomes acceptable. Because these ultra wealthy are not your enemy. That's just a fascist that's a fascist lie to think that the wealthy people who have power actually have power. That's not true. It's these poor or middle class or even upper class, but they're not the puppet master class. These blonde peaceful people. The plumber driving, a truck, that's actually your enemy. Those guys are your oppressors. Mayorkas and Garland said it, so it must be true. And Weingarten at the teachers union tells the teachers to push this narrative, and, they hire who they wish to hire, and so the narrative gets out there, and it's pushed at Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse. Anywhere where they can exert disproportionate influence, you're going to find these people pulling strings. Which is like, yes, they get further and further out of tune with the general populace, but if they're controlling the news, and then the mainstream media is going to reach a point of, you've seen it with CNN with them firing a bunch of people or like changing their spots. They're going to reach a point where people realize that the main people, the big part of the bell curve, left or right, are going to look at the mainstream media and realize, these people were controlled ops or ops the whole time. Like they're always been controlled. They're saying things that are just not true, to the point where anyone is going to notice it. Because you can't do a Pravda here because we still have the First Amendment, at least until they vote to remove it for everyone's safety. They'll do anything to get you distracted from the true power and have you focused on these blonde people who you're free to dehumanize these blonde people. It's like when they're criticizing Trump for being fashionable or something, for being a dictator on social media, and then people brought their attention to the idea that, so you're criticizing Trump for being a fascist authoritarian dictator on Twitter, and you have 1 million followers, and 1 million people saw this tweet where you criticized the authoritarian dictator who didn't take away your... That doesn't make any sense, but it does in their mind because they're in an echo chamber. Keep that in mind, that you're free to dehumanize blonde people or red-haired people. You know what I'm talking about when I say that. The proof of who holds power, who you can criticize and who you may not criticize. That should also be obvious to children. It should be obvious that the blonde people do not hold power. if you think they do, then why would they allow all of this that's happening? Why don't other groups get equal criticism? Don't you feel like you're being manipulated to focus on a red herring because people are telling you what you want to hear? It's like usually when kids leave the echo chamber of high school, and I know there's this kind of theory that they get to college and they like it's equally left wing in college. It's less so. It's less so. And if you go into the stems, it's completely different. But anyway, Chuck Dixon, check him out. Like, comment, subscribe. See you guys on the next episode.